Well, good evening and welcome to ACT TV. This is Season 3, Episode 4, and we're really grateful for you taking your time, 7 o'clock each night during this lockdown and restrictions now around the rest of the country, to tune into ACT TV and get a different view on what's going on in New Zealand and what should be happening in New Zealand. As usual, we'll just do a bit of a wrap of what's happened today, and for our money, the most significant thing that's happened is not 250,000 vaccines or 3 days supply from Spain, although that's led the news somehow. It's certainly not the fact that the government has gone and claimed that nothing went wrong at Middlemore, although that is a scandal because we now know that the patient was completely symptomatic. And if he was symptomatic enough to be tested, he should have been taken out of that room instead of being able to spread the virus to other people. For us, the biggest story is not quite yet what's happening to hospitality, although that is a really big problem, that people in hospitality can maybe open under level 2.5 or Delta level 2, as the Prime Minister calls it, but they can't actually viably turn a profit and pay their bills under level 2.5. That's a big issue that needs to be addressed, and we've talked about how the resurgence payment should be made weekly while lockdowns continue. No, the big issue is that the Prime Minister has been dodging what we believe is the smoking gun around this lockdown. The fact that this outbreak has been traced back to a person who came back from Sydney and went into MIQ, and then it leaked out of the Crowne Plaza facility. But wait, when that person came, the government had inexplicably said, you don't need to have a pre-departure test leaving New South Wales on a red flight because you're going into MIQ. Well, we see how that worked out now, but also they still insist on having pre-departure tests from people coming from every other possible country in the world, with the exception of a few Pacific Islands, and every other part of Australia if they're going into MIQ. So why did the government not have pre-departure testing when this guy that brought COVID to New Zealand came through? Well, it seems they don't know either, because they've now said, wait for it, that when there are more red zone flights coming into New Zealand from Sydney, those people will have to have a pre-departure test. I tried to ask the Prime Minister today, well, I did ask, I don't know if I got the answers, about why the government has made this illogical series of decisions to cancel pre-departure testing that included the person who eventually brought the virus to New Zealand and created this whole outbreak and lockdown, and why they subsequently reintroduced pre-departure testing for flights from Sydney. Were they wrong then, or are they wrong now? I tried to ask the Prime Minister. Let me know what you think of the answers she gave.
Why will they be requiring pre-departure testing when the last red flight that turned out to have a COVID case on it that has subsequently leaked out into the community was not?
Mr. Speaker, as I said at the time, and I reiterate this again, I would just caution the member on the assumption that had a 72-hour pre-departure test been in place at that time, that would have changed the course of history. I don't think that's a fair assumption to make.
What is different in New South Wales this coming Wednesday, or will be different, that wasn't the case last month when flights came with no pre-departure testing and the same outbreak was underway?
Mr. Speaker, the time that the decision was made was around, if I recall correctly, about the 9th of July or there or thereabouts. So that's when that decision was made based on what was happening in New South Wales.
If someone has COVID-19, should they be allowed on a plane full of people? And if not, shouldn't the government be ensuring that, to the best of their ability, this doesn't happen?
Mr. Speaker, of course, to the best of our ability, we try and reduce down risk, but we always make an assumption that every single traveller coming into New Zealand has COVID-19.
Well, there you go. It's quite a big assumption that they made when they decided maybe they didn't need to have pre-departure testing in the time when the person who brought Delta and caused this lockdown came out of Sydney into MIQ in New Zealand. If you're any the wiser after those answers from the Prime Minister, then you did better at hearing her answers than I did. In the meantime, we're going to focus tonight on education. Education, of course, has been badly affected by COVID, but it's also a long-term issue for New Zealand. And we're bringing a very special guest, someone I've known for a decade, arguably the most passionate educator in New Zealand, a maverick who's been out of the box, does things differently because he's so passionate about making a difference for the kids that go to his schools and also for the long-term future of New Zealand. Alwyn Poole is the co-founder of Mount Hobson Middle School in Remuera. He's also been in charge of the middle school West Auckland, one of the charter schools that sprung out of Mount Hobson Middle School, and South Auckland Middle School, both highly successful charter schools turned into special character schools by the incoming Labour government. What's interesting is that at that time, Chris Hipkins, the Minister of Education, said, no problem cancelling charter schools. It will be easy to have a special character school. Alwyn, always trying to make a difference for the kids, has asked that Mount Hobson Middle School be able to have a special character school so more kids could get that special style of education that's made a difference for so many in the central Auckland area. The Ministry of Education says there's no need for it. Well, who are they to say? I'm really pleased to have you on tonight, Alwyn, and I just wondered if I could start by asking a bit about that extraordinary mural behind you.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, David. So there's a wonderful artist up here in Auckland. He used to live in West Auckland called Shane Hansen, and he painted this for us as a commission for us to commemorate our family. The top part, Karen's father came from Holland in 1951 after spending 6 years under sort of Nazi rule. And immigration at the time was interesting in that he landed with his brother in Wellington, came off a ship, and they put them on a train and told them to get off at Martin and make their way in the world. And so he settled in Wanganui. So it's got the Wanganui River, the dolphins are our children. The cross is, I guess, a part of a tribute to the faith that Karen and I have, but also we can look out our window up here in beautiful Russell and see Flagstaff. So Shane did a great job, and he's a wonderful New Zealand artist, a real treasure.
Oh, that's such a cool story. Look, take us through, I guess, the state of education today, because I've heard people say, and I believe it, despite everything else going on, the one thing that really decides where New Zealand will be at in 30 years' time in terms of our society, our productivity, our ability to really make our way in the world is this. Yeah. How many kids went to school today, and how much did they learn that will be useful to them making their way in the 21st century? But I know that you're all over the stats and you follow this very passionately. You've made a lot of good presentations around the country. How would you judge whether kids are going to school and whether they're learning enough to be competitive in the 21st century right now?
I guess there's my initial perspective is this was the best time ever to grow up in the world. And people might think COVID's a bit of a glitch in that, but people are living longer, better fed, better educated in most places around the world. There are so many opportunities for young people to take. I mean, you went to Canada for a while. My oldest son has become a citizen of the US and lives and works in New York State. There are all of these opportunities out there, and yet our system is diving. And we're a very small country, about the size of an American Midwest state. We're incredibly well resourced. We should be world leading, and we're simply not. And I guess on the one hand, you can state that, and I can back it up. If people, particularly the ministry or the Minister of Education, if they're out there flying and talking about ideals and really looking for passionate, workable ways to improve things, you'd go, that's okay. You've got to start somewhere, but they're not.
And so take me through, it's a really good point that there's never been more opportunity in the world, but I think what you're saying is you've got to have the skills to take advantage of it.
Absolutely.
What are some of, just give us some raw numbers of what people might be worried about, not only with overall achievement, but of course, when we worked on charter schools, it was also about helping kids that aren't achieving get better opportunities. So it's not just the overall level of learning, but the distribution of it, the equality of it.
Yeah, so I see one of your questions here from someone, I think, Rebecca, Kelly saying, why do we have a decile system? And so people tend to recognise that and misunderstand it. A decile system is a way of funding children who come from a more disadvantaged background more highly than children from advantaged backgrounds. And the only reason we have a public free education system is actually to make up for those differences. Otherwise, sort of, we wouldn't bother. So ideally, a child going through our education system, no matter if they are going to school the Herald's got an article tomorrow about the difference between going to school in Epsom and Manurewa, and the outcomes about that. But ideally, this shouldn't take place. We should be fighting tooth and nail for a child who's going to what we call a Decile 1 school because of resourcing, should have exactly the same opportunity as a child going to a Decile 10 school. Now, when you look at the data, I'll give you one. In 2020, so the Ministry of Education have a full attendance measure, which is 9 days in 10. Even that's a pretty soft measure. So I mean, you can miss a term a week.
So you miss a week a term, but you're also you're missing basically a day every second week.
Yeah, correct.
And that doesn't count. That doesn't count getting sick. That's unexplained absences.
No, I think that's about your overall attendance. If so, the children in 2020, and this wasn't new because of COVID. Children in 2020 going to Decile 1 schools, only 35% of them were fully attending. In Decile 10 school, 35%. In Decile 10 schools, it was 70%, which I'd still say, boy, we really should be picking that up. I would think 90 at 90, which is actually what South Auckland Middle School has, but 90 at 90 would be a good target. But 35% at a Decile 1 school, and it doesn't go from Decile 1 and then all of the others are all right. You've got this kind of gradual slope where, the average between Decile 1 and Decile 2 is 41%.
So the key point about getting education to work is that it's got to work for the people who don't start off with a lot of advantages. Otherwise, what's the point in public free education? See, I asked Chris Hipkins in Parliament about these attendance issues, and he said it's not our problem. People have to show up, basically. I was pretty surprised at the answer he took, but I think he's had a rough few weeks, or the answer he gave, sorry. But, I mean, you talk about 90% at South Auckland Middle School. Obviously, there are things that schools can do to increase attendance. So how did you guys do it at a charter school?
Well, first of all, we focus on it. And so every day, back to our boards, the principals of our 3 schools send in their attendance. We have someone called a community liaison manager in both of those schools, and their job, and I met with one of them today, their job is to every morning go to the office manager and say, who's not here and what do we know? So you don't build up any patterns. But it's also about, and keep in mind now, no one can argue that we're not funded like a normal state school. We use our resourcing and the skill set of our staff and of Karen, my wife who runs the trust, to have 15 kids in a class, to have all of those children in free uniform with free stationery. They don't pay anything for IT, so you're not separating them out for different reasons. We split the day so they have a really heads down academic morning and then an activities and arts based afternoon. And they love coming to school. They're in classes of 15. They're in what we call villas of 60. We've got a remarkable staff and tremendously low turnover. I mean,
So this is really critical because I remember, I was in charge of charter schools for the end of the key government, and people used to say, oh, but they're funded more. What's interesting is that was always wrong for reasons I strenuously argued.
People would talk about us being for profit, David, and I've gone to most of my sponsors today, and there's
sponsored by mouthwash.
There's no truth in any of this at all. I mean, I'm not commercial.
Well, it's good to see you well shaved. I guess you go.
It was just these really silly arguments around it, where they would go, oh, they're not teaching the New Zealand curriculum. And due credit to the teacher unions, they came up with 6 10% true statements and just battered them out day after day after day. And it was a really contested arena. I mean, you and I even argued at times, and it was tough. But ultimately, it worked for the kids in our schools.
Well, exactly. But I think the point here is that, we had those arguments with just about everybody about how much they were being funded. And you're right. I mean, the teacher unions, not the teachers, that the union organisers, and I've always differentiated those. The one thing I've really got wrong or underestimated in politics was how much effort those people would put into ridiculing 12 small schools that were designed as really an innovation to try and help, basically, for the most part, poor brown kids who never got a chance. And they piled on dogmatically and religiously. We estimated they had a couple of people working on it full time, just trying to undermine this initiative. And that's something I never saw coming, and will be very ready for next time we're in government, I can tell you.
One of the leads even, there was an article that went out that was just obviously untrue. So I thought, well, I'll go and see him and have a chat. And I said, look, you could have contacted me. We've talked. Why would you put this article out there? It's had a real effect on me. It's had an effect on our family. He goes, we knew it wasn't true, but it was a really good way to get at you. And it's just like, wow.
But the point is that he was wrong. And what you were doing and continue to do now with a state funding formula under special character schools is organise your resources to be focused on attendance, have small class sizes, focused on learning. So it shows that money is important, but it's not everything. Often it's innovation.
And we've also written a really rigorous curriculum around the New Zealand curriculum. So we overtly teach the 5 morning core subjects that we have: English, Maths, Science, Social Studies, Technology. But the children also work through 8 cross-curricular projects. Now, I mean, looking at all that data, and because we're talking about sort of South Auckland in the Herald and stuff tomorrow, our kids leave that school and get level 1 NCEA at 86%. And these are phenomenal. It's amazing. And
just for people who might not understand how this works, so Alwyn's model, starting with Mount Hobson Middle School, is what I would call I always get mixed up with standards, forms, and years, but it's basic. Well, you give us the years just so it's clear.
It's years 7 to 10, and that came out of a lot of deep research about what works in New Zealand and what doesn't. We've never had an academic measure in New Zealand for year 9 and 10, and not much for the intermediate years. So it's kind of this period of time where we just let our kids flake away. And it's a critical period of time for their development.
And that in itself is an innovation. You basically created an intermediate and junior high sort of confected together.
Yeah, and then they can put 3 years of energy into getting their qualifications and bouncing into something worthwhile.
And what you're saying is you've actually studied kids that have gone to Middle School, West Auckland and South Auckland Middle School, and use the data to track and see how kids that went to your schools perform later when they went to other schools.
Yes, I've got the data for every student that's ever been in one of our schools.
That was phenomenal. Well, there you go. For people who say charter schools don't work, it's the options for arguing that are running out as more data comes out. Hey, I want to keep moving along because we could talk about charter schools like in good old days all night. But one of the things Chris Hipkins said when they scrapped the charter school model is, don't worry. It will be easy to apply for a special character school, which means you can basically set up your own state school. And, you have to have union contracts, and you have to have the governance model, we tell you, and you have to have our funding formula, and you have the Ministry of Education bureaucracy breathing down your neck. But, at least you can do it. So you've subsequently said, look, there's a great need for a school like Mount Hobson Middle School, expanded in the Central Auckland Isthmus for kids with special learning needs. You've demonstrated this. You've got a lot of passionate parents behind you. You've applied to have one. How did Chris Hipkins promise that it would be easy to get a special character school after charter schools go?
Well, I mean, it wasn't just Chris. I mean, I think Jacinda and I had a moment the day before she rolled Andrew Little down at the Mangere Marae, when I introduced myself and she said, look, sincerely, you've shown us the weakness in our designated character school. And she stood in at a press stand-up in early 2018 and said there's work being done on this. There's work being done on the designated character school model. And it just hasn't been done. Now, Chris is a very busy person. I actually respect Chris. I've met with him 4 or 5 times. He hasn't been prepared to speak to us in the last 4 years, but I think he's got some ability. I think his issue is with his officials. And so when you apply in this situation, you end up with an official writing the report. Now, we applied in 2020 for a 21 school. The report was so atrociously written. But worse than that, they hide from it by making a tick box recommendation to the minister that you decline the application and don't even let it go out to consultation, because they know if it goes out to consultation, people will love it. And so we've applied again this year, and it's for a school of 480. It's set up in that Villa Way. It doesn't have to be in the CBD, but it should be by a transport hub. It's for kids with who are neurodiverse, but it can be for any family that goes, you know what, that sounds like a cool model. Because we've worked with a lot of high ability kids who, in the school system they're going through, they're getting what I call output skills. They can't do anything. They just follow their interests, and it doesn't go anywhere. And this school would by and large be free. It would have a lot of experts involved. It's a total no-brainer. We've worked really well with schools in the area, and they'll send us kids that they've kind of run out of ideas for, and we've just been backhanded. It's really
and I know there's just so many parents, and they come to me as a local MP and around the country actually, who are saying, look, what the state's providing is all well and good for many kids, but not for mine. We actually want something different. So here's someone who is a passionate educator with a track record of innovating and creating new opportunities that actually, if the data shows, work. You've got an application in to start a school under the model that Jacinda Ardern promised us would be there for us. And so far you've been knocked back once and I've been a little bit involved in this twice. They're pretty, shall we say, lightly reasoned grounds. And you've now got another application in to have a go. So we're going to see, if you can't be accused of not trying.
No, and I think, one thing, and I'll just touch on it briefly, but we've seen a real deep cynicism from the ministry, and I know you've brought it up in the House, where a particular official, her name's out there, Deidre Alderson, when the minister sent a letter out saying that you don't need the school, paraphrasing a little bit, because these schools are resourced in all schools, which everyone knows not to be true. One of our parents, a lady called Jo Martin, I call her the Rosa Parks of New Zealand education, because she's bringing a lot of this stuff to light. She sent in and said, well, look, Chris, this isn't true. I donate $10,000 a term to my son's school because he has autism and ADHD. And that $10,000 doesn't only help him, it brings a teacher aide into the classroom, which helps the other 30 kids. Well, she sent that letter at 7 o'clock one night. At 9 o'clock the next morning, this official contacted the school, in no uncertain terms told the principal that he couldn't accept that donation, and bullied an 8-year-old boy. And we've just seen through an official Information Act request that she did that without even contacting the minister's office. The letter was addressed to the minister, and so we've seen a deep cynicism that I think calls into
look, it's an extraordinary story, and it is all going to come out. I have a certain amount of cynicism towards some civil servants in education, having worked quite closely with them on the charter school project and other things. But this is mind blowing, and it is just absolutely extraordinary. So just to recap the story, this parent who has been paying her school to put extra teacher aides on her kid. In a pretty angry that the application for a special character school by Mount Hobson was knocked back, sent an invoice to the minister and said, hey, look, you think it's all fine? Why don't you pay this? Next morning, gets a phone call from the ministry through to the kids' school, saying you can't accept that anymore, and basically tried to deny this kid a teacher aide. Unbelievable stuff.
Yeah, and it calls into, I think, huge question, and the minister has to answer it. The professionalism, especially when we've seen internal emails where they've gloated about what they've done, the professionalism of the ministry staff in the way that they've dealt with our application.
Yeah. So there you go, folks. This is what we're fighting against. There are a lot of good people in the New Zealand civil service. In fact, I think we probably have one of, if not the best civil services in the world. But if you ever wondered if you need to be a bit sceptical about government, this is the kind of thing that goes on, and a lot more often than people realise. And we're pretty keen to expose it and ultimately get to a stage where parents can take their kids' share of the education funding to a school of their choice, not the civil services choice, because kids only get one shot at an education, and we should be doing everything we can to adapt that education to their needs so they can reach their potential. Now, I just wonder if we could go to a few questions. I thought our chat might go on beyond the usual ACT TV format, but Sally has asked, is New Zealand doing enough to teach digital skills to kids in school? And this is kind of interesting because you get your traditionalists who say it's read and write and arithmetic, your 3 R's, and then there's other people who say, I listen to someone like Frances, whose name's just going to escape me, and she'll say, look, there's a new world, and we've got to prepare kids for the 21st century. So where do you come down on this? Is there enough digital? How do you guys operate to prepare kids for the digital world?
Yeah, I think it's one thing I'd love you guys to work on is a really good Parents as First Teachers program. And reading to kids, massively important, because literacy is literacy. And if you're working in the digital world, you're still having to understand images and text and things like that. Literacy is amazing for math. So to me, the three go together. But it's also got to be really rigorous. The thing my children most credit me with as a father was reading to them every night from the time they were 2 till the time they were 14. If we can get parents doing that in New Zealand, the digital skills come alongside it. But I've got concerns about the amount of screen time kids have.
Yep. So your view would be, yes, digital technology is just a tool. Frances Valentine is the person I was thinking of, and I've always had a lot of time for Frances.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you would say, it's digital technology is just one of many tools that people have. The building blocks of literacy and numeracy remain the same, because if you don't know English well, it's going to be difficult to use Google.
Well, I'm reading a wonderful book by a man called Eagleman called The Brain. And, one of the things that our system is really failing to recognize is all of the new information we have actually about how children learn and how to best put it into place. They go together.
We've got a question here from Jennifer, who says the new history curriculum is basically critical race theory based, and despite supposed consultation is flawed, as real historians will attest to. Do you have a view on this new history curriculum and the way it's been developed and the values that underpin it?
My main view on that would be we have got a system in New Zealand where you can make some choices to do with your local community, the children that you have in front of you, the opportunities you've got in your area. I mean, up in the Bay of Islands here, we've got a wonderful camp for schools to come to, and they can go to Waitangi and they can see all of this. My concern is that they've called this a prescribed curriculum. In other words, they're going to tell you exactly what to teach and how to teach it. And to me, that's never been education. So that would be my major concern. Yeah,
I think that's one of the concerns people have. Is education there to empower and equip kids to enjoy and thrive in the 21st century, or is it there as using other kids for a political project? Look, I'm sorry, Alwyn, we've run out of time. I knew this would go on for a while, so I'm going to have to say goodbye. But thank you so much for all you do. You really are, if not the most passionate educator in New Zealand, then certainly one of them. And if not the most innovative educator, then certainly one of them. We're really thrilled for everything that you do. It's been great to work with you over the next decade, and hopefully we'll work together over another one. And Thank you very much for joining us on ACT TV tonight.
No problem. And if I can just say, if anyone wants to get in touch, Villa Education Trust, look it up. You can find me. We're really open to contact. People can challenge us. People can support us. People can, call me Fatty and say, "Where'd you get those moves?" I see you, Emily. So yeah, thank you for having me on.
I think it's just the camera ad to £5, I'm sure. Hey, I just also want to say a word from our sponsor. If you're passionate about education policy as we are, please go to ACT's website, act.org.nz/policies. Check out our student education idea that would put parents in charge of their kids' share of the education budget. For too long, the education system has been dictated from the centre in Wellington rather than responding to the needs of parents and children wherever they may be. Our idea builds on what we did with charter schools to give more choice and innovation for all kids' education. We hope that you enjoy that policy. Please check it out. And if you like it, please consider supporting ACT and joining up. That's ACT TV, Season 3, Episode 4. Thanks a lot for watching along. Thanks to all our guests. And tomorrow night, we're going to be going back to Brooke Van Velden hosting. And I understand that she's going to have a very special guest, a particular mayor who's been articulate and outspoken about the Three Waters, well, I was going to say issue debacle at this point. It's probably a better description. But certainly they're going to be talking through some of the practicalities that a mayor faces looking down the barrel of the Three Waters policy of the government. Until then, good night.